Hi, I'm Dr. Sarah Bull, and today we're going to be talking about integrating sources into our writing. We've previously talked about how important it is to back up our claims and our arguments with sources that are validating what it is that we're trying to say. And today we're going to talk about how we can do that effectively. One of the most common mistakes that's made is that we let our sources lead us or speak for us rather than making our own claims and arguments and then letting those sources back up our claims. So we're going to talk about a method that we can use in our writing that will allow us to integrate those sources smoothly while also maintaining our own voice and maintaining control of them. So I actually use a method that I call source sandwiching, and it's kind of a way to help us remember how we integrate them smoothly, and it actually ends up looking like a sandwich, which you'll see my poorly drawn sandwich in a moment. But it's an easy way, and I think that it allows us to get four main components that we need to make sure that we're not just dropping in a quote or a paraphrase and then leaving it and not really explaining how it relates back to our overall thesis or to our individual claim. So what we're going to do is I'm going to talk to you about source sandwiching, starting with that, what we have the top piece of bread there, or the bun, and that is to introduce our idea in our own words. We want to ease our reader into the idea so that we know that they have an understanding of what we're going to be talking about, and it sort of primes the brain for the quote or the paraphrase that we're about to use from one of our secondary sources. Then what we're going to do is we want to briefly introduce that source. We've talked about the rhetorical appeal of ethos, and this is an opportunity for us to convince our reader that we're using a source that's credible and reliable, and it also just allows them to know where it's coming from and gives them a little bit more about the author or the article that is going to be used. Then we're going to either quote or paraphrase. We've talked before about when we use each of these, quotes being used when the particular language of the article is appealing and is allowing the author to speak in a way that's going to reinforce our point. And paraphrasing is when we are using that author's idea, but we are stating it in our own words and our own sentence structure. Remember, for both of these, we need the citation, which in this course we're using MLA. And you'll want that directly after, and then you'll have a corresponding entry on your works cited at the end of the paper that you're writing. And so that's sort of our ham and cheese, the centerpiece of our sandwich there, or the lettuce and tomato, or whatever you put on your sandwiches. And our bottom piece of bread or bun there, we want to make sure that we're not just dropping in a quote and then ending the paragraph or going on to a new point. This is another common mistake that a lot of writers make, is that we think that we can just sort of drop the mic and run away and leave it. And we need to make sure that we are connecting that back to our claim and making our point clear. This sandwiching method allows us to introduce with our own claim and our own idea and then end with it as well. And we're furthering it in some way or analyzing that quote to connect back to our point or connect to the next point. So we're going to use an example. We're going to, let's say, for argument's sake, that we're writing a paper on health initiatives in the workplace. And so we've done some of the other steps that we've talked about in this class. We've found a reliable source. We've read it in its entirety, and we've figured out what we want to extract from that. And so we found an article in the Los Angeles Times, and they were discussing this study of 3,300 employees. And in this study, we found a quote in paragraph 5 that we think that we want to use to back up one of our claims. So as a refresher, we're going to use that information that we just have. We're going to introduce it in our own words. We're going to introduce that source. We're going to decide if we want to quote or paraphrase, and then we're going to cite that. And then we're going to make sure that we're analyzing that, furthering it, connecting it back to our claim to make our point clear. So that first step, we're going to introduce the idea in our own words. So taking this example, we would say, while many companies are investing thousands of dollars in wellness programs in hopes that their employees will be healthier and more satisfied with their jobs, a study conducted at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign indicates this may be wasted money. Now what we're going to do is we're going to briefly introduce that source. We can do this in a couple different ways. We can mention the author's name. We can mention the name of the title. We can, in this case, I mentioned the name of the newspaper that it came from. We also want to make sure that we're using those words that we discussed in our handout, notes, observes, asserts, those academic words that we use to introduce a quote. Now we can use these, decide to quote or paraphrase, and this time I decided to quote because I kind of liked the language of this and I thought that it really hit home the point that we wanted to have. Now remember, as we've discussed, if you use the author's name in the sentence, you don't need to use the author's last name in the MLA citation, but you can. I told you a personal preference for me is that I do go ahead and use it. The other thing to note here is that we are using an online source, and in this case, a lot of times they don't have page numbers. So we've discussed how you'll want to count the paragraphs and use the lowercase PAR period to denote where you got that from. This just helps your reader go back and find that information easier. And so then that bottom piece of bread, remember, we don't want to just leave that quote there. We want to analyze it or further it to connect back to our main point. So we might have a sentence like, if these results are similar amongst other employees, companies may want to consider more useful alternatives for motivating their employees to stay healthy. From here, then, you might go on and you might talk about those other alternatives. You might even use another source that is suggesting other alternatives. You could propose some of your own with data to back why that would be useful. But what you've done here is you've constructed what I call a source sandwich, but really what it is you've constructed a way to use your source, integrate it into your writing, and allow yourself to stay in control of that source. Now, one thing to note is you don't necessarily have to have this as a standalone paragraph. This could go on and you might continue on to describe your point in more depth. This might come in the middle of a paragraph. You're not boxed into where you use this, but it is a way for you to, anytime you want to quote or paraphrase, to make sure that you are in control of your source and that you are making it clear what your argument is. So we'll be doing more examples of these in class. But for now, this gives you an example on what you are doing when you want to integrate a source into your writing. Talk to you soon.